Listen to this. During the entire First World War, one man shot down 75 enemy aircraft. 75. That's not a typo. His name was René Fonck, and when his wingmen talked about flying with him, they said the same thing every time. It was like flying with death itself. But here's the thing that makes this story different from every other ace story you've heard. Fonck didn't die in combat. He didn't go down in a blaze of glory. He survived the war. He lived. And what happened after he landed his final kill might be more shocking than anything that happened in the skies. Most pilots who survived World War I faded away. They got jobs, got married, got regular lives. Fonck, he tried to become richer than nations. He attempted a stunt so audacious, so impossible that it reads like science fiction. And when it failed, the public turned on him in a way that erased decades of heroism. Think about that for a second. A man who was celebrated as France's greatest warrior became synonymous with failure and delusion. His legacy didn't survive the landing. So what is this impossible stunt? What made Fonck so dangerous in the air that even German aces feared him? And how did a man who seemed invincible in combat become vulnerable to something far more dangerous than enemy fire? This is the story of a hunter who became the hunted, not by enemy bullets, by his own ambition. From the killing fields of the Western Front to the frozen deserts of the Arctic, from celebrity status to public ridicule, René Fonck's journey isn't just about aerial combat. It's about what happens when a warrior refuses to stop fighting, even when there's nothing left to fight. Stay with me, because by the end, you'll understand why the greatest ace of the First World War became one of history's most forgotten heroes, and why his final mission nearly cost him everything.
Let's go back to the beginning. Rochefort, France, 1894. A boy is born into a middle-class military family. His father is an officer. His mother comes from old French stock. Not wealthy, not connected, just solid, respectable, military. The boy's name is René Paul Fonck, and from the beginning he was different. While other boys played soldiers, young René was calculating mathematics. He was studying engineering. He was watching machines. In 1912, when the aviation service was still brand new, barely more than 10 years after Kitty Hawk, Fonck enlisted. He was 18 years old, skinny, intense, absolutely brilliant with mechanics. Aviation wasn't about courage in those days. It was about problem solving. How do you keep an underpowered engine running at altitude? How do you make fragile wings handle the stress? How do you synchronize a machine gun to fire through a spinning propeller without blowing the prop to pieces? Fonck understood all of it instinctively. By 1915, when World War I had already consumed hundreds of thousands of lives, Fonck was a pilot, and he was hunting. But unlike other aces, men who flew with aggression and instinct, Fonck flew with precision. He calculated every approach. He conserved ammunition. He would wait for the perfect moment, and when he fired, he rarely missed. According to French military records preserved at the Service Historique de l'Armée de l'Air, French Air Force Historical Service, Fonck's first confirmed kill came on July 1, 1916, a two-seater reconnaissance plane. One clean burst, the pilot didn't even know what hit him. After that first kill, something awakened in Fonck, a clarity of purpose. He wasn't flying for duty anymore, he was flying for the hunt. In 1916, Fonck flew the Newport 17, a nimble single-seater biplane. Not the fastest, not the most heavily armed, but in the hands of a pilot who understood physics and patience, it was deadly. By 1917, when France was bleeding through the Nivelle offensive and morale was collapsing across the army, Fonck became what France needed, a visible symbol that victory was still possible. One man in a small aircraft, outthinking and outfighting the enemy. But then something happened that changed everything. In May 1917, Fonck was reassigned. He was given a new aircraft, the SPAD-7, a revolution in fighter design. faster than anything German pilots were flying, more powerful, more durable, more lethal in the hands of the right pilot. Fonck had found his perfect match. Man and machine became one. From May 1917 until the armistice in November 1918, René Fonck shot down 54 German aircraft. 54 in 18 months. That's an average of nearly 3 kills per month. Other aces had flashes of brilliance, periods of incredible success. Fonck was consistent, relentless, mechanical in his efficiency. German pilots called him the most dangerous man in the sky. Not because he was the most aggressive, but because he was the most precise. You never saw Fonck coming. By the time you knew he was there, your engine was on fire.
Let's talk about what made Fonck different. Not brave. Brave wasn't his trait. Brave is what you call a pilot who charges into impossible odds. Fonck was calculating, strategic, cold. Imagine this. You're a German pilot in 1917. You're flying a bombing run back to German lines. You've got maybe 3 more miles before you're over friendly territory. Just 3 miles. You think you're safe. Then Fonck appears, 2,000 feet above you, 6 o'clock position, directly behind where you can't see him. You never see him until he fires. 1 burst, maybe 2. Your engine ignites. You're watching flames consume your instrument panel. Your aircraft is falling, and the SPAD that just killed you is already diving after the next target. According to the official records from the Aeropostale Company, where Fonck flew commercial routes after the war, he described his combat technique in an interview. "I do not fight with anger," he said. "I fight with precision. Every second in the air is mathematics. Every bullet is a calculation." This attitude made him unique among World War I aces. Most aces flew with intensity. They dove, they climbed, they dogfought. Fonck flew like a chess master, thinking 3 moves ahead, never wasting effort. But here's where it gets interesting. Fonck's efficiency meant something else. He survived, unlike other aces who took risks and paid for it in blood. In 1917, a rival French ace named Georges Guénemer, whom we covered in our previous video, disappeared over enemy territory. 53 confirmed kills, and then nothing. No wreckage, no body, just absence. Fonck watched. Fonck learned. Never take the unnecessary risk. Never chase an enemy too deep into their territory. Always calculate the cost-benefit. Always come home. By 1918, Fonck had become France's top ace. More kills than anyone else, more confirmed victories than any Allied pilot. He was shooting down an average of 1 German aircraft every 3 days. And then, the war ended. November 18th, the armistice was signed. René Fonck had flown 196 combat missions. He had 75 confirmed kills. He was 24 years old, and he had nowhere left to hunt.
Now this is where the story takes a turn. A very strange turn. After WWI ended, Fonck became a celebrity. Paris welcomed him as a hero, parades, medals, admiration. But Fonck was restless. The problem with being the best at something is that once it ends, what do? You can't go back to normal life. The sky had ruined him for anything else. So Fonck made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He decided to attempt something even more impossible than air combat. He decided to fly across the Atlantic. Not just across, non-stop, from Paris to New York, in a single flight, without stopping, without refueling. This was in 1921. Think about that time period. Aviation was still in its infancy. Planes could barely stay in the air for 6 hours. New York is more than 20 hours away from Paris. It was mathematically considered impossible. But Fonck believed his calculations. He'd spent years doing the math of combat. Now he was doing the math of distance in fuel consumption. He commissioned an aircraft called the Sikorsky S-35, a massive plane, twin engines, built specifically for this flight. It cost a fortune,
money Fonck scraped together through sponsorships and investors. Everything was riding on this. His reputation, his money, his pride. All of it was going into one aircraft and one flight. May 8, 1926, Le Bourget Aerodrome outside Paris. Fonck takes off with his crew. The aircraft is overloaded with fuel, so heavy it barely becomes airborne. The wheels leave the runway. The aircraft rises. It's happening. The impossible is happening. But then, disaster. The aircraft's landing gear doesn't retract. The wheels stay down, creating massive drag. Fonck tries to compensate. He nurses the aircraft higher, coaxes the engines. He's fighting with all his skill to stay airborne. But physics doesn't care about skill. The aircraft is too heavy. The drag is too great. It's not going to make it. Fonck turns back toward the airport. He's going to attempt a landing with a full fuel load. An aircraft this heavy, carrying this much fuel, one mistake means explosion. One mistake means death. Fonck lands the aircraft. It touches down, the wheels engage, the fuselage scrapes the runway, sparks fly, metal screams. And then, silence. The aircraft has stopped. Everyone is alive. But the Atlantic flight is over. The dream is finished before it started. Now here's where it gets worse. A week later, another French pilot, Charles Lindbergh's rival team, successfully flies from Paris to New York. They do exactly what Fonck failed to do. They become international heroes. And Fonck? Fonck becomes a cautionary tale. The man who crashed in the mud and wasted a fortune. The ace who couldn't handle anything except combat. Think about that moment. René Fonck had been untouchable in combat. He'd outflown the best pilots in the world 75 times. But in a single landing, his reputation fractured. The aircraft he'd invested everything in was destroyed. His investors were ruined. His dreams were shattered. And the French public, which had celebrated him, turned cold. Fonck tried again in 1927, another aircraft, another attempt, another failure. This time the aircraft crashed during takeoff. People died. Fonck survived, but his legacy didn't. He became synonymous with hubris, the pilot who couldn't accept that the world had moved beyond him, the man who'd peaked and refused to acknowledge it. But here's the cruel irony. Charles Lindbergh, who succeeded where Fonck failed, became the most famous pilot in the world. His name is still known today. René Fonck, 75 kills? Forgotten. What happened to him after 1927? Fonck lived a long life. He became involved in aviation business. He wrote books. He gave interviews. But it was never the same. He tasted the sky as a hunter. Everything else felt like imprisonment. The ground couldn't contain him, nor could any other achievement. According to biographical accounts, including the memoir Flying Ace published in 1929, Fonck struggled with the transition to civilian life. He'd been the best at something, and when it ended, so did his purpose. He died in 1953, 61 years old, living in a world where he was rarely remembered. All those 75 victories, all that precision, all that cold calculation, erased by a single failed landing attempt. That's the cruelty of legacy. You can dominate your field, you can be the best, but if you stumble once, the world forgets everything else. So what is the legacy of René Fonck? If you ask aviation historians today, they'll tell you he's a historical footnote. 75 confirmed kills, highest-scoring Allied ace of the First World War, a man who revolutionized fighter tactics through precision and calculation. But nobody remembers him. Lindbergh is famous for flying the Atlantic. Fonck is remembered for failing to. That's the only footnote that's stuck. But here's what makes his story important. Fonck's trajectory teaches us something about ambition, about the dangers of refusing to accept that chapters end. Combat was his element. He dominated it through discipline and intellect. But when combat ended, Fonck tried to recreate that dominance in aviation records. He was chasing the same feeling, the same sense of being untouchable. And that chase destroyed him. The interesting part, according to records from the International Aviation Hall of Fame, Fonck's tactical innovations were revolutionary. He pioneered attack from above and behind. He developed fuel conservation techniques. He taught an entire generation of pilots how to think about combat mathematically instead of emotionally. These innovations influenced aviation tactics for decades, but nobody credits him anymore. They've become standard practice, so disconnected from his name that students learn them without ever knowing Fonck existed. That's a different kind of erasure. Not the erasure of being forgotten, but the erasure of being absorbed. Your greatest achievements become invisible because they work so well that they stop being attributed to anyone. René Fonck wanted to be remembered. He wanted to achieve something impossible, to prove he was still relevant. But in trying to chase that dream, he became defined by failure. And that's the cruelest irony of all.
So here's what we've learned about René Fonck. He was the greatest fighter pilot of the First World War. 75 confirmed kills, precision, calculation, cold brilliance. But he's not remembered for any of that. He's remembered for trying and failing to cross the Atlantic, for one moment when his careful calculations met reality and lost, for crashing in the mud. And that teaches us something about how we construct legacy. One moment of dramatic failure can eclipse decades of achievement. But it also teaches us about ambition, about what happens when a person reaches the peak and refuses to come down. Fonck should have been satisfied, should have retired a hero, should have accepted that his moment had passed. Instead, he chased a new dream, and the chase ruined him. If this story moved you, if Fonck's tragic fall from grace stayed with you, hit that like button right now. Subscribe for more forgotten aces whose legacies deserve better than footnotes. Comment below, should Fonck have retired after the war, or do you respect his ambition even if it failed? What's your take on his legacy? Next week, we're covering the pilot who ejected from a disabled bomber at 25,000 feet and survived, without a parachute. You heard me right. His name was Nicholas Aucamade, and his story is even more insane than it sounds. Thank you for watching. Keep honoring the warriors that history forgot.